Welcome to the Patchwork podcast. My name is Brandon Robertson. Patchwork is a show that brings together various voices and perspectives on the topics of spirituality, social renewal, and culture to help you expand your mind and tap into a richer, fuller life. To start, let me introduce myself. For as long as I can remember, I've had a passion for bringing together diverse people and perspectives. Today, I'm an author, a pastor, and a consultant to faith communities, governments, and nonprofit organizations around the world, helping them build bridges and create understanding in the midst of diversity. This podcast is an extension of that work and that passion. In every episode, we'll dive deep into a topic with an expert in the field and see if we can get a better understanding. You might agree with what's said, and you might disagree. But whatever the case, I invite you to lean in and listen deeply, because I assure you that you'll find something worth grabbing onto in every conversation. As with all things done in public, your support means the world to me. So if you find today's conversation compelling, please tweet, post, like, share with all of your friends on social media using the hashtag Patchwork. And your feedback really does make every episode of this podcast better. So if you have time, please consider heading over to iTunes and leaving a review. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let's dive into today's conversation. How do we live our best lives? This is a question that I think all of us are always seeking the answers to. Some of us turn to health and fitness to find wholeness and a vibrant life. Some of us turn to religion or spirituality. Others of us find other ways to try to align ourselves with the flow of the universe and become more healthy, whole, and fulfilled individuals. But the pursuit of a good life is all of our goals. It's what we're all about all the time. It's how we make our career choices, our family choices, who we love, who we'll date, what kind of activities we'll spend our time doing. It's all in pursuit of this life of abundance. There are many people in the world who teach and help guide us towards better understandings of meaning and fulfillment and how to overcome conflict and challenges in our lives. Again, these might be psychotherapists or pastors or teachers. And for some people, it might come through the channel of a life coach. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been kind of skeptical in the past of life coaches because honestly, there are so many people out there on social media today claiming to be life coaches, and I'm not so sure that their insight or direction will actually benefit me. Just by looking at the content, it doesn't seem quite deep. But I came across a life coach a few years ago that struck me as somebody different. This wasn't a life coach that was giving shallow answers to the questions of our life, but was willing to dig deep, was willing to get real, was willing to admit when he didn't know or lean in with curiosity in the midst of complex situations and circumstances and see what sort of wisdom could emerge from two people. He's not only a life coach, but this person is a writer, an influencer, somebody who's creating a lot of really good content. And he's also happens to be a gay man, which I really appreciate as somebody who's also a gay man, to be able to find somebody in my community that can speak from my unique set of experiences as an LGBT person and also continue to give deep, meaningful advice. The person I'm talking about, his name is Jordan Bach. He's a life coach, a motivational speaker, a blogger, a certified yoga and meditation teacher. He's been recognized as one of the most influential teachers on contemporary spirituality scenes. He's down to earth, and his approach reaches a whole new generation with some of the most important wisdom of old and also insights of new. Today I got to sit down with Jordan in what is one of my favorite interviews on the podcast so far. And we talk about all sorts of issues, ranging from how we stay healthy and sane in this political environment, talking about the importance of freedom of expression and speech, and also about how we can move towards this goal of satisfying and fulfilling our day-to-day lives and our dreams. Jordan gives so many nuggets of insight in the course of this interview. I know you're going to be blessed by what he has to share. And so I'm really excited to present to you this interview today with my friend, life coach, speaker, and writer, Jordan Bach. To ask the question, I feel like life's journey always is unexpected. I feel like we have oftentimes senses of callings and directions of where we think we're going to go, but the path to get there is always unique. It always is surprising. And so how did you find yourself in this place in life where you are coaching people and creating content and just being out there helping people to live healthier, whole lives?
It's interesting because I've said in many podcasts, and I've certainly shared in my own content that I was raised by atheists. I had no religion in the home. I had no spirituality in my home, or really even in my community. New England, even though in Boston where I grew up, is quite, there's a lot of Irish Catholics, not too many Jews, although my grandfather is a Holocaust survivor.
Wow.
It's pretty secular around here. And so, it's in Boston, it's academic really, and pretty secular compared to, say, another region of the country, like the South, for example. And so I really had no exposure even to spiritual material, whether that be religious or, non-religious. I had no exposure. But what makes it, I think, unique and interesting is that since I was a little boy, I always felt the presence of a hovering, I'll call it a hovering, compassionate, strong presence. And, one time when I was a little kid, I was actually still in a bed that was like a crib. I need to check with my mom to get my dates right. But I woke up and I intuitively knew, which is to say, I just knew that no one was in the house except for my grandmother, who lived with me until she died. And I had a sense of panic because I was a little child. I was scared. I felt alone and panicked. And suddenly, in the midst of my panic, I didn't see anything. I didn't hear words, but I will say a sort of, I don't know how else to describe it, but by saying a voice, a presence, an energy entered my mind and said, relax, it's going to be okay. Nan is in the basement doing laundry. So I climbed out of that crib or bed or whatever it was. I need to get that straight. I climbed out and I took this long odyssey as a 2-foot tall person down 2 sets of stairs to the basement, where I found my grandmother folding warm laundry, and I hugged her leg. And that moment for me, in hindsight, was this, whatever this hovering, compassionate, strong presence is in my life, and I believe in everyone's life, whatever it was, that's my first memory of interfacing with that presence. And then my father's a really intelligent guy. He has pretty penetrating intellect. And so he would say at the dinner table that if you believe in some higher power, you're intellectually feeble. You're not very smart. You're just believing in something as a sort of delusion to guard against the harsh realities of life. And so because he's smart, I took his word for it. So it's funny that I myself I was like a militant atheist. I was like, you can't be smart and believe in anything that you can't see. These are just imaginations. But I couldn't deny the fact that I still felt this presence. I just didn't know what to call it. The interesting thing is, like, unlike so many people, as I said, I wasn't surrounded by any religiosity whatsoever. I had never opened a Bible. I didn't know what that was. I knew that there was this so-called person named Jesus, but I had no idea about any of it. But I was still spiritual. So I was like trying to figure out how to make sense of it all. And then when I was in high school, I was just in the woods one day. I went to boarding school in the midst of beautiful woods in New England. And I went out and I was walking alone in the woods, and I sat down on a big rock, and I looked down and I saw this little ant, and it was going about its business, carrying a little leaf, and it had a purpose. It was doing something. It was like marching along. And I thought, how does that little ant know what to do, and that he has a purpose, that he has something to do? What is this drive to live, so to speak? And then I looked up at the tree, and I saw the trees, each of them reaching for the canopy. And I thought, how does that tree know what to do? Well, why is it striving? And that really was a moment for me that was what Oprah would call an aha moment. I started to think more deeply, not in terms of a bearded man in the sky, but this primal impulse that we have to grow, to collaborate, to evolve, to connect, and to thrive. And then when you read the great mystics, when you're 14 years old and you open up a Rumi book, a book of Rumi's poems, and you start applying what he said hundreds and hundreds of years ago to what you're thinking about the ant in the tree, then you go, whoa, people have been talking about this for a long time in not necessarily Christian ways. There's a mystical quality to life. And I really believe if you're interested in the question, you will find your life path to the answer, or at least you'll enjoy unraveling the mystery while you're here.
I love that. I think those are such beautiful examples. And that undercurrent, that drive to live, how do you experience that today? Do you feel like that needs to be understood or actualized as a being, or can that be an evolutionary force? You've kind of used words interchangeably, but for people who perhaps might not be religious and or identify as spiritual, is there a way to understand that drive to life differently?
Yeah. You can call it whatever you want. And I do use these words interchangeably because I feel it's important that we do.
Yeah.
It's hard to understand and intellectualize the mystery. I don't think you can intellectualize it. Speaking of Rumi, he said, beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. And in that place, words, even a phrase like each other, doesn't make any sense. So I think that field, that mystical field, an experience of love and connection and evolution, of triumph over struggle, that's that field where words don't make any sense. So in my own in my own life, I use the word God. Maybe because I'm a rebel and I'm just tickled by the fact that I was raised with no religion whatsoever.
Yeah.
And yet I believe so strongly in this force. And so I kind of like the word God for me, for my own personal reasons. But if someone is like, oh, I don't like the word God, it makes me feel uncomfortable, maybe because of bad religiosity in their upbringing that made them feel stifled and unlike children of God, but made people feel small or held back or ashamed, they can use another word that at this point on their path feels more closely aligned. The universe, light, whatever you want. The point is, how are your values changing? And I think that's a good marker of whether or not your spiritual path is truly helping you evolve into the human being you're meant to be. An acorn turns into an oak tree, a little blossom turns into a flower, embryo turns into a baby, and we're not meant to stop growing at birth. We as human beings are meant to continue to evolve. So if you can check in wherever you are on your spiritual path and say, are my values getting stronger? And are they more closely aligned with better discernment, compassion, truth, and really, hopefully, not walking around judging other people because they don't believe what you believe.
On every episode of Patchwork, I try to give us a few moments to disconnect from the craziness of our days and our surroundings, and to breathe. When we center ourselves, when we open our hearts and our minds, when we disconnect from all of our obligations and responsibilities, it's those moments that creativity flows, that compassion becomes a reality within us, and that we become better bridge builders and better empaths. So for the next 30 seconds, take a moment and sit with me in the silence of the moment and just be. As we bring our awareness back to reality, may we keep this inner peace and stillness, and may we continue to listen with wonder and curiosity at all that the universe is seeking to teach us every moment of every day. Now, let's hop back into the podcast. And I find it interesting. So you paint this contrast of how you grew up versus how your spirituality has evolved. What do you say to the people in your life, perhaps in the world in general, who don't believe they've experienced the divine or the spiritual mystery? I don't know if those people exist, because in my world, I feel like everybody's had some sort of experience, but there's definitely a group of people in the world who have that anti-spiritual, anti-religious sentiment. What do you think their experience is, and how do you speak to people like that?
Well, the thing is, number one, I don't. That's not my audience for my work, and that's okay. That's fine. I don't need to speak to everyone. And it really helps to let go of this belief that you have to appeal to everyone. I think if you're doing what you're meant to be doing, you are going to offend some people, and that's okay. If you're not intentionally, deliberately hurting them, but they are offended, in many cases, it's a sign that you are saying something of impact and value. So by and large, I don't. And I love a good argument. And it's just how I was raised. My father taught us to be able to hold our own at the dinner table. So there we are. I'm like 7 years old, and he's like, "What do you mean? But how do you know? And what do you mean?" So I love a good argument. Yeah. So when I first started, talking about spirituality, I enjoyed kind of contending with people who, said I was a magical thinker. Now it's a waste of time. Preach to your choir and stop trying to convert people. That's a lesson that has served me well in life, in my work. And I think it's really, really important. That said, you used a term just now to describe a group of people as anti-spirituality. Well, if you're anti something, you're just going around looking for evidence to support your view. And guess what? I'm doing the same thing. I'm looking around every day, looking for evidence of miracles, looking for evidence of grace. And turns out what you seek, you shall find. So I would be careful about what you're seeking out on a day-to-day basis. That's true when it comes to politics and religion and spirituality. It's also true in our personal relationships. I tell my clients very often, if you suspect he's cheating, that's enough to start a conversation. Don't go poking around in his emails. Why? Because I live by an adage, seek and you shall find. And also you can just look in your personal relationships. If you're looking for evidence that someone's judging you, you'll find it. If you're looking for evidence that they are wonderful people, you'll find that too.
That's so good. I love that. And yeah, I think it's spot on. I also love the insight that you don't often hear. It feels counterintuitive when you to hear you say, preach to your choir. But exactly, I mean, it feels like the people that life, the universe draws you to are the people that you're meant to be speaking to and living with and doing life with. And yet, again, that's feels like such a radically countercultural message to so much of what we've been.
Again, yes, Brandon, yes. And you said countercultural, and I think it's important to note that there is in the zeitgeist at this moment, almost, it's as if everyone feels that they need to be a fighter. So just thinking about that for a moment, that in the zeitgeist on social media, especially, a huge amount of people, overwhelming amount of people, assume that they need to fight something. And sometimes it's good to fight and to stand on your values and say, not on my watch. And then sometimes you need to recognize you don't have all the information. Maybe sometimes you don't really know what you're talking about or who you're dealing with. Yeah. And that's amazing too. And this is this quality of discernment. I think that's what, if you're on a spiritual path that works for you, you can know it works for you because your ability to discern what your next right actions are increases. Your capacity to do so increases. And I've learned over the past few years to stay in my own lane, to know my lane, to blow it out of the water. And when it comes to things I don't really know about or I'm not sure about, to maybe stop and listen. Maybe stop and listen before I fight for something. Yeah, I think that would behoove many, many, many people on the internet today who have no idea what they're talking about, and have no idea what really is happening. And this is true in politics, and certainly, as you know, in religion and spirituality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another such a good word, I think, on that same kind of line of thinking. One thing that, just being open and honest, I've been noticing more and more in my own life, right? That technology, social media continues to grow, to have this overwhelming drain on time and energy. And there are so many good things that come in this era of technology and social media. But I also, in my own life and in the world around me, it kind of drives me crazy to walk around and think about how often we spend so much of our precious energy staring at screens, and how perhaps that's not the way humans were designed to function. I wonder how you think about and view this world that we live in, where it seems like increasingly social media, technology are the way that humans are functioning, and if there's any adverse impact and how we might overcome that.
Well, certainly the adverse impact, just it's uncontested, is that the blue light from the screens that we're watching, especially later in the day, really screw with our circadian rhythms. When you see, it's like moths gathering around light at night. There should be no light for them. And I always feel so sorry for those moths and those insects gathering around a light that's artificial. It's not real. It's not the sun. So similarly, we're gathering around, and this is, I'm kind of making a metaphor, but at the same time talking about very real physiological changes that are happening in us. We're gathering around this artificial light, and it's screwing up our brains. Certainly affected in my own personal life, it affected my sleep until I realized that it was, I said, I'm an insomniac. Why can't I sleep?
Yeah.
And then I started, I got all smart bulbs in my house, which not everyone can do, but I got all smart bulbs. And now at sundown, I turn them all to red. And I always have on the, night shift on my iPhone and my iPad and my computer. And that really increased my sleep. What happens when my sleep is better? Well, I'm less anxious and depressed during the day. I'm happier. I'm more in tune with myself. But when it comes to social media, it's a dopamine thing and an adrenaline thing. You scroll and you see people so angry and fighting in the comments. What's happening isn't that they're necessarily so tortured in their lives. Although sometimes, like a comment I read yesterday that was absolutely horrible, about a woman who's a friend of mine who's a body positivity activist. And someone commented something so cruel that I messaged her and said, imagine how tortured they are. They have to torture you. But sometimes the aggression that we see online, Trump this, or, what's her name? AOC this, and just the fighting. And then you get in people get in these arguments. What's really happening is they're getting an adrenaline rush. They're getting a dopamine boost, and that's addictive. It's important to remember that there are people who are game designers, engineers behind all of these companies, social media companies. They're engineering these programs so that we will spend more and more time on them and check them more and more frequently. They're gamifying our attention span. And in many cases, if not most, for profit, for money. So this is also the age of Aquarius, this time period that we're in. And part of that is a rise in technology. But the paradox, one of the paradoxes of the age of Aquarius, is that we're more connected than ever before, but more disconnected than ever before at the same time. How that plays out, how that manifests itself, well, that's very clear. I work from home, so I could stay home, not see or touch or hear any of my friends or family or loved ones in real time. But I can be on a Skype call to Dubai. I can be talking to you now. I can be chatting with people on Instagram, but not actually feel human touch or hear someone's voice in real time, which is healing. So that's just when you become aware of this, I think you just become more grateful for and more attuned to the amazing healing quality of being with other people in real time. And then the relative importance then of social media starts to fall away of its own weight. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's so good. Again, I'm glad you brought up the idea of the paradox, but it does seem like that this growing chasm in our culture is that we feel more connected than ever, and we're also more lonely than ever, and we're more depressed than ever. And I also think you've touched on this, we're more divided than ever. I think technology definitely has a place in creating those divisions. But I wonder, why do you think in this particular moment of human history, we've come to this point where it seems like we've all become extreme ideologues that are very waging civil war at each other. And there's so many reasons, I know, cultural, historical, all sorts of things going on. But it's just perplexing to me as a spiritual person and as a spiritual teacher looking out into the world and saying, I don't know why we keep feeling this impulse to go to war with one another. I wonder if you have any thoughts there.
Well, like I said, it's interesting. I like to argue. Does that mean that I ever, in a reasonable debate, insult someone or attack their character? No, because that automatically it virtually annihilates my people's trust in my reasoning. So no, I don't do that. And I've said for a while now there should be a mandatory college class for in at least American colleges, debate 101, arguing 101. Here's what you cannot do. Here's what makes it not an argument and makes you look like an idiot. People don't, grown people, grown men and women, many seem to not understand that when you, sling a character attack and start saying, speaking about your opinion as if it's fact, that invalidates your argument. And so what we're seeing in the media, this is a problem. My parents are liberal, progressive people. I went to a high school where my first friend was transgender. It was like at my high school, it was like not cool if you weren't queer and or quirky. That's been my life. Some kid was singing a 50 Cent song, a white kid, and said the N-word as he was singing along. We had school off for the day. It was a school-wide assembly. Wow. School classes were canceled for the entire day. And this is back in 2001. So I've been in this. I've been in the liberal progressive environment for so long. And if I'm beginning to say, hold on, some things are going on that are fishy. I see newscasters on television channels that I thought were my channels, talking CNN, MSNBC, sitting not like Walter Cronkite at his desk reading facts, but spouting opinions and clearly slanting information to serve a particular goal. That's scary to me. And then I turn on Fox News, they're doing the same thing. So what we have is people being fed information that is slanted, and it's creating division, and people are taking slanted information and these narratives that we've created around particular public figures and policies, and electrifying people with it. Mm-hmm. So we're in a way kind of being used. And there's one thing that I will not allow to be done to me, and that's to be used, to be manipulated. And it's one thing to truly misunderstand information and to be ignorant, because you can't help being ignorant about something if you don't know about it at the time. But what you can do is deliberately misinform or slant. And I think that is a cancer in our society. And what's fascinating to me is that it's happening now, not just from the evil right, which is what we were kind of raised with in New England, but also from the people who I thought that's my tribe. So, and that's why I say that today. I really want people to wake up and do your best to speak truth, to know what you're talking about, and to have a level of discernment that allows you to filter out opinion and agenda-driven information from real truth. I think that will help us on our spiritual paths. It will help us on our journey as Americans in this great American experiment. I think it'll help us all, and it will help us really, I think, come together, because once the truth annihilates opposition instantly. It's just the truth. Everyone knows that. So yeah, I encourage people to, especially spiritual people at this point, and as we're headed towards 2020, to just look for the truth. And there are some people on the right who are telling the truth, some people on the left who are telling the truth, some people in the middle who are telling the truth. Pay attention to people who are telling the truth, no character attacks, no slanting, just the truth. I think that's what, my greatest spiritual teachers and mentors, dead and alive, are at least encouraging me to do at this point, to look at the truth.
That's so powerful. And I just, that metaphor that you talked about earlier came up for me again as you're speaking now. And it's that gamification of our culture, that we're in this place where everything has become this means of entertainment, where we become these players in a game. And it's not about the truth. It's about how can we attack? How can we divide? How can we conquer those who are perceived enemies? And it seems, what a weird era to be living in, where we have to implore people that the truth is the thing we should be seeking. And yet, as I say that, I also think to my own spiritual teachers, dead and alive, this has been the message that humans have struggled to grapple with for centuries, that we need to learn that the truth is what sets us free. It's the thing that we need to be seeking out the most.
And listen, these are hard problems. It's when I hear someone say, that's problematic, or this is problematic, I go, do you know what life is? It's one big hard problem.
Yeah,
it's problematic. A lot of people know their stuff. A lot of people don't know their stuff. A lot of people are angry. A lot of people are dealing with so much in their personal lives, in their own personal trauma, their own personal fight with themselves, that when they turn on the news, they're just like, okay, that's the truth. I don't have the bandwidth in my life to investigate or to discover the truth. So in a sense, I feel bad for people who are just being fed a diet of misinformation. And I think that this is also true as much in news and politics as it is in the world of religion and spirituality. And so you'll notice that I've taken a bit of a step back for a little bit, because I'm really trying to synthesize all of these multivariable problems, and tune into what people really, really need right now.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I was just listening to someone earlier today speaking about Jesus and speaking about the New Testament, and he said, the New Testament was there, yeah. It was compassion, kindness, and in the Gospels. And then he said, but you can't ignore that Revelations was there too.
Hmm.
And so what that means is there's judgment in Revelations, and that could mean for us, I think, as St. Augustine said, if you haven't found a compassionate interpretation of Scripture, you're not done yet.
Hmm.
And so I think the idea of judgment in the Bible as a whole, Old and New Testament, is we can bring that into our personal lives as discernment. And that's what we've just been talking about, is really being able to discern the truth, and also do that with compassion. And the two, turns out, balance each other very well. Compassion and discernment. If you're just a compassionate person walking around, and you're compassionate to everyone and everything, and somebody walks up to you and says, give me your wallet, and you go, yeah, here you go. If you're a person who's popular, and 1,000 people email you saying, pay my college loans, and you go, okay, yeah, and then you're bankrupt. You need boundaries, and boundaries and discernment are one and the same. I think this is something that needs to be brought into the modern spiritual conversation, because we've evolved now from the age of being open, completely open. I think the sexual revolution and the AIDS crisis, almost they carried important lessons for us in our spiritual development, personally and as a society. Obviously, having to do in many cases with love, and also with boundaries and discernment.
Well, I feel like I've learned so much in the past 30 minutes, so I really appreciate you taking time to be with me. And the last zinger question I just want to throw at you, and
it's a zinger.
Not all that zingery, but I'm going to ask you to make it like as simple as you can.
Okay.
You have been on this path of learning and being a student of life and spirituality now. And I wonder what you've discovered at this point. What are the practical things that help us day to day to feel like we're living a life in line with meaning and in line with purpose? Because this is the question I feel like we're all always asking.
Oh, so it's, for me, it's very simple, and that's service. If you can go to bed every night knowing that you've shared some sense of illumination, some sense of reassurance, hope, or allowed, or really shouldered the responsibility of making yourself available for the work of grace in the lives of other people, then you can fall asleep knowing that no matter how much money you have in your checking account, no matter how many accolades you have or how many followers you have, that you've really achieved some measure of success. And when we start gearing everything in our lives, our personal relationships, our work, toward doing that, making yourself available for the work of grace in someone else's life, whether that means how you smile at the person behind the counter at Starbucks, whether that means how you change the tone of your social media posts and your emails to your coworkers. That's what it's really all about. And I know, I don't just believe, it's now become a knowing for me that at the end of this life, I will look back and I will carry all of that love given and received with me, and nothing else will last. And because I know that, it changes the way I go about my days. So to answer your question simply, it's in one word, and that is service.
Well, that's so good. Well, Jordan, seriously, thank you for taking time to chat with me. Again, I'm not just saying this. This is one of the most insightful interviews I've had in a while. So thanks for sharing your gifts with me and with this podcast and with our world. I hope you found today's conversation challenging and inspiring. It's through listening in and learning from others who see the world differently than us, which, by the way, means absolutely everyone, because no two people share the same vantage point. That's how we grow and expand. If you did enjoy today's podcast, please share it with your friends on social media. And when you do, don't forget to use the hashtag Patchwork. We really appreciate it. Thank you again for spending time with us today. Until next time, peace be with you.